All right. So, Unit 10 is about Papua New Guinea's foreign policy. Now, why is foreign policy important? Foreign policy is important because any country needs to have a foreign ministry, a foreign policy. That policy sort of dictate or helps define the role of the state in their relationship with the neighboring countries, okay, in their bilateral relations. So in this unit here, let's look at the objectives. So there are three objectives here. So number one, we have to explain why Papua New Guinea had an initial foreign policy of friends to all, enemies to none. All right? Why do Papua New Guinea, after independence, advocated for this idea of friends to all, enemies to none? And after that, another foreign policy came on board, and that is the friends, or rather, active and selective engagement. All right, that is after the 1980s, and that was under the Chen government. All right, Julius Chen government. And then we look at how these two foreign policies here and its application, in its application in the international arena. Okay, and that is by looking at PNG's membership in the international organization and the benefits of Papua New Guinea in the international community. So let's start by looking at, or let's see what foreign policy is according to the introduction, and I'll read. The process of foreign policy making is determined by a number of important considerations, either actual or perceived by nations as factors affecting their national interest. Some of these factors include state power, which comprises the strength of the national economy, level of development, armed forces, and population size. The geographical location of the state is also an important consideration. Existing alliances such as military alliance, historical relationships such as the Commonwealth, the African Caribbean Pacific European Union, and the PNG relationship and other economic groupings are among consideration. The perception by neighboring states and other states where a state may have common interest in commodities trade, human rights, and other public issues of interest are also considered. So, if you look at the introduction, you would have noticed the word interest popping up about 3 or 4 times here. So when you talk about foreign policy in itself is about pursuing the interest of the state. Okay, that's sort of summarize what foreign policy is. So every state, every countries around the world, they pursue their state or their interest in terms of their relationship with other international communities. It's like if you look at the individual level, you have a friend here. Before meeting a friend or before being acquainted, it is not because of his or her physical attribute, but it's because of what sort of personal interest that you want to cultivate with your friend here, at a personal level or relationship level. This is similar to the state, all right? The state in itself is like an individual, like you and I. Okay? If you are hungry, you will pursue food. Your desire, your hunger will make you want to look for food. Your interest for satisfying your appetite will make you to go out of your way to look for food. So if you look at that kind of thinking, foreign policy is dictated by this state interest. Now, before foreign policy is being made or being coming into existence, foreign policy is driven by certain ideological foundation or structural foundation for our case. So with that kind of, let's say, explanation, let's look at what the foreign policy foreign policy making in Papua New Guinea. All right, and I'll read. In PNG's case, all of the above factors influence successive governments to adopt a bipartisan approach in matters of foreign relations affecting its national interest. Again, national interest. All right, so foreign policy is dictated by national interest. As a small state, Papua New Guinea has no capacity to secure its national interest alone. It has to work together with other countries to affect favorable outcomes through the process of negotiating and compromise. For instance, PNG, as a commodities price taker of all its primary products, has to build alliance with other producer countries to secure acceptable prices with the consumer countries in bargain on the world market. Similar analogies can be drawn on other aspects of PNG's foreign relations, including national security, promotion of trade, for instance, PNG as a commodity price taker of all its primary products has to build alliances with other producers countries to serve acceptable prices with consumer countries in bargain on the world market. Similar analogies can be drawn on other aspects of PNG's foreign relations, including national security, the promotion of trade, investment, and development cooperation. All right, a mouthful of words here, but let's break it down. Why do Papua New Guinea need foreign policy or engage in foreign policy? So after independence, Papua New Guinea was a very small state. Papua New Guinea depended on Australia for foreign aid, supporting budget. So that is why Papua New Guinea cannot stand on its own feet after independence. It needs the support of Australia and other international communities. And an example here, it states that Papua New Guinea is, let's say, coffee, cocoa, and other produce. Now, Papua New Guinea need to sell this produce in the international market. Now, in the international market, meaning that there are some countries that need this produce. So, in order for Papua New Guinea to sell this produce, Papua New Guinea doesn't have to go and start a fight with a country like that, because Papua New Guinea is so small. That's why Papua New Guinea needs to make friends with this country, so that with that relationship, it will enable Papua New Guinea to sell coffee, cocoa, and other agricultural produce. So this paragraph here is trying to make a statement that Papua New Guinea needs other countries to survive in the international community. So within that context comes the framing of the first foreign policy. What is it? The friends to all, enemies to none. All right? The caption itself, okay, is enough for us to understand what kind of foreign policy that is. So the first foreign policy that the Somara government launched was friends to all, enemies to none. After independence, we were small, okay, in status, economically. So why the hell should we go and pick fight with countries? So the Somali government have noted that during that time, Cold War period, we have USSR, the communist bloc, and the alliance or the US. So we are mindful of the Cold War period. So Somali government came out clearly that we do not wish to take side, either be on the United States and the capitalist or the USSR and the communists. What Papua New Guinea wants is that Papua New Guinea is open to discuss foreign relationship or foreign bilateral relations with either China or USA or Russia and UK. Both are from different ideological grouping. But friends to all, enemies to none foreign policy enables Papua New Guinea to talk to anyone, everyone, despite the ideological difference or the ideological warfare during the Cold War. So here, and I'll read, had independence in September 1975, the new government of Prime Minister Sir Michael Sumare promulgated its first post-independence foreign policy to be that of friends to all and enemies to none. This policy was based on the concept of universalism. Okay, remember this word here. Friends to all, enemies to none is based on the concept of universalism. Or universalism is another way of saying that Papua New Guinea's foreign policy encaptures friends to all, enemies to none. So making bilateral trade with countries that Papua New Guinea might not agree to or is on two ideological spectrum in the Cold War period. So that's the idea of what universalism is. Okay, remember that word. If I ask you in the test what is universalism, universalism is the idea that a bilateral relationship, okay, is established in regards of any ideological barriers or structural. So Papua New Guinea can be friends to everyone as possible, something like that. Right, the Sumare government considered this policy approach to introduce a young nation to the rest of the world as best foreign policy approach. So, after 1975, the universalism approach, friends to all, enemies to none, was only appropriate because Papua New Guinea is new as an independent state, and Papua New Guinea is trying to make its way in the international community. So picking fight is not a good option. So as best as possible, we have to make friends with people we disagree to and we agree to in a way to help us grow our country. So that was the thinking behind the Sumare government. Behind the Sumare government's pursuit of friends to all, enemies to none approach or policy. Okay, I'll read. It allowed the young nation to interact with other independent nations with an open mind. Okay, this is important. Without being prejudiced by the political and ideological persuasion of its former colony. So Australia is part of the Anglo-American section, okay, in the Cold War. So having to be part of Australia, we might be seen as part of the alliance bloc. So Sumare government stated that despite our relationship with Australia, we are an independent nation. So we do not aspire to be with any particular grouping. Okay, something like that. So the approach allowed Papua New Guinea to establish diplomatic relations with countries as possible from both sides of the ideological divide on the Cold War era. So that is sort of a context behind the friends to all, enemies to none policy. Now, after the 1980s, 1978, another foreign policy approach came on board, and that is the active and selective engagement. Right, so let's see what this foreign policy is about, and I'll read. A decision was taken in the middle of 1978 to review the foreign policy strategy of friends to all, enemies to none. The review was undertaken in 1979, and in 1980, the government of Sir Julius Chen, who had just assumed office, after a successful vote of no confidence, promulgated from a foreign policy white paper a new approach to foreign policy making through active and selective engagement. This basic foreign policy approach has guided successive PNG governments to conduct their policy strategies within the bounds of this framework. Different governments have emphasized different aspects of conducting foreign policies or foreign relations based on what they perceive to be PNG's national interest at a given point in time. All right, so after 1978, fast forward to present, we have been operating on this selective and active engagement. Now, what is this selective and active engagement? I mean, friends to all, enemies to none is universalism. It's an open door policy. But friends, active and selective engagement, Papua New Guinea is now refocusing its energy strategy to having relationship with countries that will strategically benefit Papua New Guinea in the long run. So let's say, for example, the Marape government now signed the Puk-Puk Treaty, okay, and that's a controversial Puk-Puk Treaty, the defense treaty, okay, and that treaty talks about improving the defense force. Our forces will go and work in Australia, and we share military intelligence, something like that. Okay, this is an example of an active selective engagement. Why? Papua New Guinea needed to modernize Papua New Guinea's defense force because our country do not have the resources, the capacity, and even the money to modernize defense force. Now, having to sign the treaty, that relationship with Australia will hopefully address the modernization, lack of modernization in defense force. So when you do that, you are actually applying the active and selective engagement approach. We are selective in terms of choosing Australia and active in terms of trying to modernize our defense force. So that is an example of active and selective engagement. With the mind, or in hindsight, that we have also China in or at present in our country and is very much an influential development player in our country. So we know that by signing the Puk-Puk Treaty will sort of cause tension with our relationship with China, but Papua New Guinea's interest in modernizing defense force, okay, was put first over its relationship with China. Okay, can you see it? So that's active and selective engagement. We are selecting Australia because of our particular national interest, and our national interest is to modernize the Papua New Guinea Defense Force. All right, so that's after 1980s, Papua New Guinea has been operating on this active and selective engagement. So you would see that, okay, under Prime Minister Marape, you would see an open door or friendly bilateral relationship with Australia. But when Peter O'Neill comes in, he might change its approach by not looking at China, but look towards the Asian region. That is where, if you read in Papua New Guinea politics in the 1990s, under the Winty government called for a look north policy. So a look north policy is actually in line with this active and selective engagement approach. So active and selective engagement approach utilizes Papua New Guinea's national interest over the universalism approach that is friends to all, enemies to none. All right? So friends to all, enemies to none is in a way trying to make friends with everyone as much as possible. After we did that in the 1980s, now we've changed the approach by, we have friends there, but we are selective in terms of how that particular friendship will benefit Papua New Guinea. So that is the active and selective engagement. Now that sort of plays out in our membership also in the international organization or in the international arena. Oh, I'll give you another example. So in the Israel and Palestine conflict, Papua New Guinea is supporting, let's say, supporting Israel for self-defense or the establishment of Israel as a state. Why? Because Papua New Guinea has a very big Christian population. So because of Papua New Guinea's interest on the international stage in regards to that conflict, Papua New Guinea is, okay, or it is only appropriate for Papua New Guinea to stand with Israel. All right? So that's how you read international politics by applying these approaches here. Okay, let's look at membership in the international organization, and I'll read. In October 10, 1975, Papua New Guinea became a member of the United Nations, where it, for the first time, exposed to multilateral diplomacy in which contacts were made with other developing countries from the different regions of the world. Much of this multilateral networking was carried out with the United Nations-based political groupings such as the G77 and the non-aligned movement. The result was that PNG was able to make many contacts with both developing and developed countries who shared similar concerns and aspirations. The effort reinforced the sentiments of the friends to all, enemies to none foreign policy. Today, the multilateral diplomacy also reinforced the sentiments of active and selective engagement foreign policy. So when looking at membership in the international organization, having to have a foreign policy approach dictates how Papua New Guinea operates within this international organization. All right? So let's say the World Food or World Health Organization is part of the United Nations, the World Food Organization, something like that, or poverty, all these small groupings within the United Nations, all right? Papua New Guinea's membership to all these, starting from United Nations and to other groupings, is dictated by the kind of foreign policy we have. So active and selective engagement will guide Papua New Guinea in establishing its partnership with, let's say, World Health Organization to deliver medical drugs to address tuberculosis, TB, or even HIV and AIDS. So because Papua New Guinea has a concern in regards to high population living with HIV and AIDS and TB, that national interests sort of dictate how Papua New Guinea belongs to those groupings in the international organization. And that is driven by Papua New Guinea's foreign policy approach, which is, it can be either friends to all, enemies to none, or active and selective engagement. All right, so that sort of conclude our Unit 10, and let me try and do a summary while talking about the objectives here. So friends to all, enemies to none came about right after independence. Now the reason behind this is that the Somara government wanted Papua New Guinea to make friends with countries on both sides of the ideological spectrum. Because we were a new nation, it is only appropriate for us to have many friends as possible to learn from, to adopt and to embrace, okay, democracy or economically, to help us assist in terms of developing our country. But after 10 or 20 years from independence, we have changed this into active and selective engagement. So active and selective engagement, or before we go to that, so friends to all, enemies to none is a universalism or universalistic approach. From moving from universalism to the active and selective engagement, the active and selective engagement at the forefront of this approach is driven by Papua New Guinea's national interest. If we see that we need to sell more produce and we are not selling much of our coffee to Australia, then active and selective engagement approach will only make us to look elsewhere, and that is to look towards the Asian region or the Asian market. So when we are making bilateral relationship with China, South Korea, Japan, we are activating this selective and active engagement approach here. And after 1978, Papua New Guinea, depending on whichever prime minister, have been advocating, or rather not advocating, but applying this active and selective engagement approach. Now that is important when Papua New Guinea tries to become member of international organizations such as the United Nations, okay, the World Health Organization. Papua New Guinea becomes a member of this organization because of its national interest. And because of its national interest, Papua New Guinea has been adopting this active and selective engagement approach. All right? So that sort of summarizes the discussion on Unit 10. So with that, next week we are going to look at foreign aid and foreign investment. All right? So class dismissed, and we see you guys next week.